The morning came slow to the plains, dusty blue bleeding into the horizon, the kind of quiet light that made even the hawks pause mid-flight. Tatu sat on his porch, spine straight, moccasin boots grounded, a folded woven blanket resting beside him like a fragile offering. He had been there since before first light, still as the cedar beam behind his back, eyes locked on the distant ridge where train smoke sometimes rose and vanished like a broken promise. He was 30. But in the way he moved and held silence, he seemed older, like he carried winters other men had only heard stories of. The people in town said little to his face. Behind his back, they said more. "He's waiting for a ghost," muttered Mrs. Haddle as she passed in her apron and muddy boots. "Thinks a white bride's gonna ride into his arms like it's some dime novel." She spat to the side, as if even the thought of hope offended her. But Tatu didn't hear them. Or maybe he did, and simply chose not to respond. The porch boards creaked with the weight of memory. This house had once echoed with laughter, a softer voice, a smaller shadow by his side. His Comanche wife had died the previous December, the coldest anyone could remember. Their child didn't live long enough to be named. He'd buried them both at the rise where snow drifted like feathers. Built a grave of stone and silence. And for a while, he thought his own breath would stay beside them forever. But life doesn't ask if you're ready to go on. So he wrote a letter. To a woman named Rosemary Givens. 27. A mail-order bride from Missouri. Kind, the ad said. Tired of the games of younger men. Willing to live far. With someone quiet. She had written back with warmth. She'd said yes. Said she would come on the July train. That was today. He had prepared. The porch swept clean, a second cup of coffee boiled and untouched on the rail. He even painted one of the two chairs soft green the week before, though his hands weren't used to such gentle work. The train came at noon. It shrieked like an iron animal and hissed as it slowed, sending a dozen faces spilling out onto the station's cracked wood. Merchants. Miners. A widow with children. But no one stepped down with eyes searching for him. No woman held a letter. No Rosemary. Tatu waited. 1 hour. 2. The whistle screamed again, and the train pulled off toward the west. He stood only when the last carriage vanished from view. Later that evening, a rider came, one of the town's skinny postboys with a leather pouch bouncing at his side. He looked nervous as he dismounted and handed Tatu a sealed note. Tatu took it without a word. Broke the seal by candlelight. There's been a misunderstanding. Miss Rosemary Givens was taken into custody during transit. Further correspondence is discouraged. No signature. No explanation. Just the heavy thud of something closing. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He simply folded the note twice, then a third time, and tucked it into the worn leather pouch where he kept dried corn and buffalo teeth. He sat again on the porch. Same position. Same silence. This time, he didn't bring out the blanket. 3 days passed. The town buzzed with theories. She never existed. She saw his skin and changed her mind. They say he was trying to buy a white girl. That's what the army thinks. Mrs. Haddle's words carried far. She never lowered her voice, only her morals. On the 4th day, children rode by with makeshift wooden rifles, mimicking soldiers. Bang bang. He's got a bride locked in his barn. They laughed and galloped off. Tatu didn't flinch. But that night, someone left a dead pigeon on his porch, wings torn, beak broken. He buried it beside the corral and whispered an old Comanche lullaby. Not for the bird, but maybe for something inside himself. In the days that followed, Tatu returned to the old rhythm of living, feeding the horses before himself, mending the fence near the ravine, chopping wood as the sun dipped low and red behind the ridge. The blanket remained folded. Not out of bitterness. Out of respect. Then came another evening. The sky bruised purple. A single figure rode toward his home, not from town, but the northern trail. A rider in Union blue, stiff in the saddle, dust crusted around his mouth like old salt. Tatu met him halfway down the path. The man dismounted, handed a scroll bearing the seal of Fort Bowie. "You are requested," the soldier said. "Not asked." "Requested." Tatu read it. Words like investigation, misrepresentation, and national interest floated up like oil on water. He looked up at the soldier and said nothing. Just gave a small nod. The man blinked, unsure how to respond to a silence so complete. They think you might have had motives with the woman." Tatu said nothing. But his eyes held something ancient. The kind of grief that had learned how to hold a blade without cutting anyone yet. When the writer left, he stood on the porch once more. This time, he unfolded the blanket. Laid it gently across the painted green chair, like a prayer waiting for legs. The wind came through the valley slow and heavy. Smelled of river moss and distant smoke. He lit a small oil lamp, placed it beside the door. And then he waited again. But now, the blanket was not for Rosemary. It was for what was coming next. The sun hung high when Tatu crossed into Fort Bowie's outer shadow, his horse moving with the calm gait of a creature used to watching its rider face trouble without a sword or cry. Tatu wore no weapons. His hair was tied tight at the nape. His jacket bore smoke-stained edges from years of quiet work, not war. The soldier at the gate shifted uneasily, as if unsure how to receive a man who rode like a windless day, unhurried, unreadable. Tatu dismounted without waiting for instruction. He tied the reins loose on a fence post and walked through the open gates as though he had walked through 1,000 before. Inside, the fort did not welcome. It bristled. Rows of men lined the barracks yard, guns polished, boots too clean. They paused to stare, lips curling, whispers sticking to the summer air. "That him? Mail order savage. Heard he tried to smuggle her out west like livestock." Tatu met no eyes. He simply waited. A door creaked behind him. Then boots, measured, deliberate, clicked across the planks. A man in a neatly pressed blue coat approached, wide in the shoulders, gray at the temples, and cold as stone. His voice was clipped. Authority without warmth. "Major Silas Boone." Tatu didn't respond. Boone narrowed his gaze. "You understand English?" Tatu gave a small nod. "Then you'll understand this isn't a friendly chat. You sent letters. Promised a woman safe harbor. She was intercepted halfway across Kansas with no papers, no clear guardian, and crying to be let go. Now, you expect me to believe it was all innocent?" The words dropped like frost on dry leaves. Tatu looked past him, toward the distant mesa, its red bones jutting up through the earth like forgotten teeth. Boone folded his arms. "You can't look at a woman like that and expect no one to question your intentions." Still, Tatu said nothing. "You're lucky we intercepted her before she reached your door. Had she vanished, we'd have your scalp strung from the barracks flagpole." A boy's voice interrupted the tension. "Father, he didn't even blink." Tatu turned. There, standing near the fence line, was a pale-skinned boy of 12, hat too large for his narrow head. He carried a wooden slingshot and wore a hand-stitched vest with a single feather pinned awkwardly to the side. "Elijah," Boone snapped. "Back inside." The boy hesitated, eyes flicking back to Tatu. Not with fear. With interest. Then he obeyed. Boone sighed. "The woman Rosemary Givens has been placed with a government house near St. Louis. She won't be coming west. And if she attempts to, we'll know. And we'll stop her again." A long silence passed. Boone leaned closer. "Say something. Anything. Show me you're not a danger to this territory." But Tatu's silence spoke clearer than most men's sermons. It wasn't ignorance. It was control. Not submission, but refusal. The refusal to make himself small. Boone's lips thinned. "Fine. Have it your way. But we'll be watching." Tatu turned and walked back to his horse. As he passed the edge of the yard, he felt a tug at his coat. It was the boy Elijah who had circled around, barefoot now, eyes wide. My mother was Comanche, the boy said softly. They don't talk about her. Tadhu paused. She used to hum in the mornings. That's the only thing I remember. Tadhu reached into his coat and pulled out a strip of dried meat, wrapped in cotton cloth. He placed it in the boy's hand and gave him a nod, not to silence him, but to honor what little was spoken. That night, as Tadhu reached the ridge overlooking his home, the wind shifted. Smoke. But not the kind from a hearth. It came sharp, like burning cloth. He urged his horse forward. The house was intact. But the porch was not. The green chair he had painted for Rosemary lay overturned. The blanket, so carefully folded and kept, was missing. In its place, a smear of mud and something worse, a chicken's foot nailed to the post. A crude curse. A joke, perhaps. But not one that passed lightly. Someone had come in the night. Laughed. Desecrated. Still, Tadhu did not shout. He did not go into town. He swept the mud with a birch branch and burned the cursed charm in a quiet fire. His hands trembled only once, when he reached for the green paint and found the can upturned, wasted on the grass like spilled hope. He repainted the chair anyway. Slowly. Stroke by stroke. Green again, but darker now. The color of pine after rain. By morning, word had already spread. Guess the army set him straight. I heard they're gonna remove him. Good riddance. Mrs. Haddle told anyone who would listen, I told you. Men like that, they take what they want. That girl never stood a chance. The sheriff said nothing. Neither did the preacher. Their silence, though different in intent, felt just the same. That evening, Tadhu walked to the well behind the church. He hadn't drawn water there since winter. But his hands needed to do something. The rope creaked as he pulled, sun low behind the steeple. A voice met him as he poured water into his canteen. I read your letter. It was the postmaster's wife, young and plain-faced, with sleeves rolled and eyes heavy from nursing twins. She sent it through us. Rosemary. Before she was taken. She handed him a scrap of paper, creased, worn, as if someone had read it too many times. They pulled me off the train. They said I couldn't choose you. That you weren't fit. But I'll find a way. I will. I meant every word I wrote. The handwriting was hurried. Fearful. But alive. Tadhu held the letter like a relic. Like a thread through fog. She tried, the woman whispered. Don't let the town tell you otherwise. As the sun bled orange behind the chapel roof, Tadhu walked back to his porch and sat. The green chair beside him gleamed softly in the dying light. The blanket was gone. But the letter remained, folded in his hand. And far to the north, just over the ridge, for columns of cavalry riders emerged like ghosts, their uniforms catching the sunset like polished bone. They came slow. Deliberate. Not scouts. Not messengers. An army. But Tadhu did not rise. He only sat straighter. And waited. The sun never reached his porch the same way after that day. It broke through the clouds more warily now, as if even the light had begun to mistrust the land. Tadhu rose before it, gathering water, checking his fence line, grinding corn with steady hands. There was no ceremony in how he lived, just rhythm. He kept to it like a man stitching himself closed, one chore at a time. On the 5th morning since the soldiers first appeared, a low whistle echoed from the cottonwoods. Not bird, not wind. A signal. Tadhu turned. By the creek stood the boy Elijah Boone, shoeless, mud on his knees, clutching something under his shirt like it burned him. His breath came fast, shoulders rising and falling in sharp bursts. I ran, he said, before they changed their minds. Tadhu didn't move. They were going to move you. Tonight. Say you broke something. Say you threatened a white woman. Doesn't matter what, just enough to make them move in. Still, Tadhu remained silent. Elijah stepped closer, unwrapping the object he held, a government issue map, edges torn, creased from hiding. They've drawn it all out. Your home. This ridge. The well. They don't want you gone. They want to make it look like they were justified. Tatu took the paper gently, like a man accepting ashes. He didn't read it. Just folded it once and slid it into his saddlebag, where he kept other pieces of broken truths. The boy dropped his head. I shouldn't have read your letter. I know that. But I did. And I know she meant it. She meant to come. She wanted this. Tatu's eyes softened slightly. For a moment, he looked not at a soldier's son, but at a boy on the edge of two worlds, neither of which had made room for him. He reached down and gestured toward the barn. Elijah blinked. I can stay? Tatu nodded. That night, they shared a bowl of beans cooked over the low stove. The boy chewed in silence, watching Tatu's movements like scripture. Every gesture was purposeful, how he cleaned the knife, how he set his boots just so, how he stacked firewood like it mattered. Outside, the wind howled. But inside, it was warm. Worn, but warm. When the boy lay down on a woven mat near the hearth, he whispered, Do you miss her? Your wife? Tatu stared into the coals. He said nothing for so long the boy thought he might have fallen asleep with his eyes open. Then, quietly, Tatu spoke. She danced with her heels still in the dirt. Never once lifted them. Elijah frowned. Why's that matter? She said if the earth couldn't feel your joy, it wasn't real. The fire cracked, and silence returned. In the days that followed, they moved like shadows beside each other. Elijah learned to check traps, to tie knots that held against rain, to tell the age of a deer from the softness of its prints. Tatu gave no praise, but the boy glowed in the quiet nods. And then came the letter. Not from the government. Not from Fort Bowie. But from the hands of a drifter, one of those sunburned old men who slept beside saloons and traded whiskey for secrets. He brought it folded in his hat. Said it came from a house near St. Louis. Rosemary's handwriting. The paper trembled in Tatu's hand as he unfolded it on the porch, the green chair beside him catching late light. They say I was mistaken. That I imagined the letters. But I remember every word. I don't know if this will reach you. But I will come, if I can. I meant to be yours. I still mean to be. No promise of when. No explanation of how. But it was something. Elijah read it over his shoulder. His mouth twisted. She still wants to come? Tatu nodded once. They won't let her. Tatu's eyes met his. Then she'll have to come through something. Same as anyone else. That night, the air shifted. Storms walked the ridge, wind beating like hooves across the land. But there was another sound beneath it, a low note, stretched and lone. Not thunder. Not weather. A war horn. Tatu stiffened, then stepped outside. The sound rose again. Faint. Distant. But Comanche in shape. He hadn't heard it in years. Elijah stepped beside him. Was that yours? Tatu shook his head. Another tribe? A warning? He didn't know. But he reached for his saddlebag and retrieved a bundle tied with deerskin cord. Inside, a handful of black ash, collected from his wife's burial fire. He'd kept it all these months. Hadn't known why. Until now. He poured it into a cloth and tucked it under his belt. What is that? Elijah asked. Memory, Tatu said. For when they try to take it. The next morning, they found hoofprints in the soft soil near the barn. 2 riders. No greetings. No message. Just presence. A reminder. Elijah scowled. Why don't you tell someone? Tatu's jaw tightened. The ones who listen already know. The others wouldn't hear even if thunder sat on their roof. Later that day, a rider from town brought news. The soldiers had doubled in number. Some said the fort was preparing for a civil adjustment. Others whispered the term cleanse. The town didn't speak out. But doors closed a little faster when Tatu passed. Some faces looked down. Others away. Mrs. Haddle crossed herself at the bakery. But just a few watched with shame in their eyes. Tatu saw it. And said nothing. That evening, he removed the saddle from his horse, spread his old buffalo hide across the porch, and knelt in prayer not to a God above, but to the land below. The stones. The grass. The wind that remembered names even after the tongues that spoke them were buried. Elijah joined him. Unsure. Clumsy. But willing. As night fell, Tatu took the folded map from his saddlebag, the one that marked his home like a disease, and held it to the fire. The flames ate it slow. Letter. By. Letter. No anger in his eyes. Just something stronger. Resolve. Because ashes don't vanish when burned. They rise. And they leave a trail only the wind can read. The field behind Tatu's barn stretched wide and yellow, untouched by hooves or claws. It was the kind of land deer once loved: soft earth, tall grass, no traps. But for months, no hoofprints came. No rustle in the brush. Just wind and the quiet tension of something watching. It had become a place where nothing wild dared go. Tatu stood on its edge one morning, watching the way the breeze laid the grass flat and then let it rise again like breath. Elijah approached slowly behind him, a wooden pail in hand, half full of water. "They're moving," the boy said. Tatu didn't look at him. "They've brought more wagons to the ridge." One of them had barbed wire. A long silence stretched between them. "I think they're planning to fence you out before you even know it." Still no answer. "I'm not supposed to know that. But I heard them say it: section the Comanche out, herd the cattle in. Like you were a wolf." Tatu finally turned, slow and heavy. His gaze didn't burn. It never did. But it held weight. The kind that makes even the wind hesitate. He reached out and took the pail from Elijah, setting it on the ground, and pointed toward the porch. The boy obeyed, no words needed. When Tatu returned to the barn later, he found a note tucked beneath the latch, crudely folded. The writing was harsh, pressed too hard into the paper. "You have until Sunday to vacate the land. Official notice. Do not resist. For the protection of the county and settlers. No signature. No seal. Not law." A thread dressed in pretense. By noon, 2 riders passed along the ridge. They didn't stop. But they made sure to be seen. One of them lifted a canteen, poured water to the dust, and laughed. Elijah stood beside the barn, small fists clenched. "Why do they do that?" "To be seen," Tatu said. "Not as men, but as threats." "They want you scared?" "They want me angry." "Are you?" Tatu didn't answer. That night, Tatu walked alone to the church well again, same as before. But this time, it was the preacher who met him there. Reverend Tillman, white-bearded, sunburned, with hands that shook when they weren't holding something sacred. "I didn't see you at the Sunday service," the preacher said softly. Tatu stared at the rope in his hands. "You never see me." Tillman winced, as if the truth struck harder than he expected. "They're building pressure, Tatu. I can feel it. And I know what men do when they start convincing themselves they're righteous." Tatu nodded. "You came to warn me?" "I came to ask if there's anything I can do." The rope creaked. The water sloshed. "You can stop pretending I ever had protection," Tatu said. "So I can stop pretending to expect it." Tillman lowered his eyes. Tatu handed him the full bucket. The preacher took it, humbled. When Tatu returned, he found Elijah asleep on the steps, arms wrapped around his satchel, face still holding the last hints of boyhood. The boy had started calling the cabin home. Quietly. As if scared to break the illusion. Tadhu didn't wake him. Just sat beside him and watched the stars. At dawn, hoofbeats again. But this time, not from the ridge. From town. A small procession of townsfolk approached on foot and wagon, led by a woman in a black shawl. Mrs. Haddle. Elijah startled awake and stood, barefoot, dirt-streaked. Tadhu rose slowly, his expression unreadable. The woman stepped forward, holding something wrapped in white linen. She placed it on the porch with trembling hands. A blanket. Not the old one. A new one. Stitched from what looked like clothes, scraps of cotton, wool, old flour sacks turned soft with age. It wasn't elegant. But it was made. I was wrong, she said, voice thick. You weren't lying. She wrote me once. Before all this. Asked if I could bring her flowers on the day she arrived. I never answered. Elijah watched, blinking. This wasn't the same woman who hissed from bakery windows. She meant to come. We all just couldn't believe a woman would come for someone like you. Tadhu bent and picked up the blanket. Ran his fingers over the seams. Someone like me, he repeated. Not with venom, but with the echo of an old wound. Mrs. Haddle wiped her hands on her apron. You'll need more than prayers when they come. I don't have rifles, but I have sons. And I told them if you fall, we all fall after. The others behind her murmured agreement. Some held tools, some held shame. It wasn't an army. But it was a start. That afternoon, Elijah returned from the South Hill, breathless. She's coming. Tadhu turned. I saw a carriage. Not military. Not theirs. Just hers. I think it's her. I swear it's her. The sun was starting to lower, laying gold across the porch, softening the scars on the earth. Tadhu didn't run to greet it. He walked. He moved to the field behind the barn, the one where no deer ran, and stood still. The wind stirred. And then a low drumbeat. Not from the earth. Not from any instrument. From a heart. His own. He closed his eyes, whispered an old Comanche word, Nami, meaning hope between storms. Then he looked toward the road. Still no one. Not yet. But something had changed. Because even in a field where nothing had dared come, he now believed someone might. The morning broke cold and breathless. No birds sang. No crickets hummed. The land held its voice like it, too, was waiting. Tadhu stood alone in the yard, wrapped in a deerskin cloak, ceremonial paint traced down his jaw like falling shadows. His long black hair, once tied in mourning, now fell loose and clean. He had washed it in silence that morning and braided a single red string behind his left ear, the color of warning, the color of blood, the color of love not forgotten. Elijah watched him from the barn door, dressed in a too large buckskin coat, fear warring with awe in his eyes. They're really coming, aren't they? The boy whispered. Tadhu nodded once. From the ridge, the sound rose, not one horse, not 10, but hundreds. Wheels creaked. Metal struck rock. Flags lifted in the wind, and under them, rows of blue-uniformed soldiers began to appear, climbing the slope like a slow wave. 400 men in perfect silence. No war cries. No drums. Just boots and bayonets and the hard weight of decision. Major Silas Boone rode at the front, straight-backed and stern, silver trim on his shoulder glinting in the dawn. He looked like law. Like finality. Behind him, Elijah's place in the world shrank. But he didn't run. Tadhu stepped forward, bare-handed. He walked past his barn, past the broken gate, past the field where no deer ran, and stood alone at the top of the hill, between the soldiers and the land he called his own. One man. Facing 400. Boone slowed his horse. Last chance, Comanche. Leave, and I won't let the men make it cruel. Tadhu didn't answer. He just looked. Boone's jaw tightened. You think silence will save you? You think this, he gestured to the painted face, the unarmed stance, makes you a martyr? You're nothing but a trespasser. The wind stirred. And from the crowd of soldiers behind him, someone shifted. A voice broke through. Wait, a woman called out. That's him. Heads turned. Even Boone turned. She was there. Rosemary. She stepped forward from the trees, dirt on her hem, her face worn by wind and long travel, but her eyes sharp and sure. She wore a traveler's cloak, wool faded by sun, and in her arms an envelope, dirt-stained but whole. I have letters, she said. Every one of them. Written in his hand. Promising safety. Marriage. Not trafficking. Not lies. Boone barked. That woman was under protective custody. She fled. She's unstable. But Rosemary's voice rose over his. I chose him. I chose this. No army has the right to take that from either of us. Silence swallowed the ridge. Elijah stepped forward now, heart pounding. He moved past the rows of legs and muskets and flags, past his father's outstretched hand, and crossed the invisible line between orders and truth. He stood beside Tahu. This man never lied. Never raised a hand. He gave me food when my own wouldn't. And I'd rather be called his son than yours. Boone's face twisted, fury and disbelief crashing together. Elijah, get back here. The boy didn't move. A breathless moment passed. And then Tahu finally spoke. Just one line. If you want blood, take mine. But you'll never get it with my hands raised. He didn't lift a weapon. He lifted his arms, open and wide, like the branches of a dying tree. And there in his palms, he held nothing. No knife. No rifle. Only his life. The line of soldiers wavered. Eyes lowered. Guns tilted. One by one, the youngest among them began to drop their gaze, not in shame, but in refusal. They'd been trained for rebellion. But what they saw wasn't rebellion. It was a man standing between the past and the future. Boone raised his pistol in rage. Fired once. The shot cracked through the air, sharp, final. But it missed. The bullet hit the dirt by Tahu's foot. He didn't flinch. And then came a louder sound. A thud. Boone's arm dropped. A private had hit him across the jaw with the butt of his own rifle. Another soldier grabbed the reins of Boone's horse and pulled it back. No more, someone said. We didn't come here to shoot prophets. Boone struggled, shouted, but no one helped him. The general who had traveled from Tucson weeks earlier now emerged from the rear ranks. His eyes scanned the ridge, the porch, the boy, the woman, and the man who had not moved. And then he nodded once. Withdraw, he said. The soldiers began to turn. One by one, column by column. The storm passed not with gunfire, but with the sound of retreat. Rosemary reached Tahu slowly. Her hands trembled, but she touched his with reverence. His paint smeared across her skin. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. He lowered his arms and nodded. Elijah, tears in his eyes, looked up at him and whispered, You didn't even fight. Tahu placed a hand gently on his shoulder. I stood. The three of them walked back to the porch as the light deepened across the valley. The new blanket lay folded on the chair, and Tahu set it across Rosemary's lap as she sat. Elijah leaned on the step beside them. No fanfare. No celebration. Just peace. Earned. The wind finally changed. And in the hush that followed, an old woman in town, Mrs. Haddle, lit a lantern in her window and said a prayer. Not to a god, but to a man. And to the field where no deer had run. They would return now. Because peace, like deer, only comes where it's welcome. And Tahu, the man who stood before 400, had welcomed it with nothing but dignity. And silence. And love that refused to bend. That's what the West remembers. Not guns. But who stood when all others knelt?